Going to call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Are there any public comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I pass it on to Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Let me just pull up the Finance Committee agenda. I apologize. We had HR up here. So we have two items on the agenda tonight. One is going to be our September of 2023 comparison with prior year. A lot of what we're going to see tonight is either in line with expectations or consistent with prior year. Starting from a revenue standpoint, overall revenue is at about 67.06% of budgetary numbers, compared to the prior year of 67.88%. Very comparable, very consistent. And what we're seeing from a revenue standpoint is that local revenues, which consist of our local tax dollars, different levels of taxing authorities, whether it's transfer tax, delinquent taxes, or income taxes, are very strong as of September of 2023. You can see that for 2023, we're at $97,704,059, representing about 78.99% of budget in comparison to prior year of 79.9% of budget. Again, very, very comparable. The only two line items that are lagging as far as local revenue, and this is what we talked about in prior meetings, is our transfer taxes and our interim real estate taxes. Transfer taxes listed second on this list here is a little bit behind prior year, about $170,000, and our interim real estate taxes is a little bit behind by about $151,000. Again, this is as expected, as we know, with the amount of turnover that was happening in prior years during the COVID, or the height of the COVID and the real estate market. We did expect this slowdown. Current real estate taxes, which is represents about 65% of our overall budget figures, are coming in very strong at $93.4 million, $3.5 million increase over prior year, which represents about 3.94%. So overall, local revenues are at $101,363,890, an increase of about 2.85% over prior year. And these are either within expectations or, as we just discussed, coming in line with our budgetary numbers. Going back to our summary sheet, state revenue. State revenue is a little bit behind right now. We're at $3.1 million, 12.36% of budget. If you look at prior year, we're at about $3.2 million, 13.32% of budget. And that's attributable to the Ready to Learn block grant. That's a state-funded program that comes through from the Commonwealth. It represents $169,000 of our budget. Those funds are in process at the state level, and we're just waiting for the money to be received. As of September 30th, the money just hasn't hit our bank account, but we expect it to hit in November, bringing that state line item back in line. As far as federal revenue goes, we're at $502,956, 26% of budget, while prior year was $1.1 million, 61% of budget. Again, if we look at it from a federal revenue, which is cost reimbursement grants, as we spend the money, we bill the federal government essentially for it and collect it. It becomes a matter of a timing issue, and we're just working on spending those federal dollars, but we do expect that to come in line with federal budgetary revenues. So like I said, overall from a revenue standpoint, we're at 67.06% of budget compared to the prior year of 67.88% of budget. Very comparable, and everything's in line with expectations. As far as the other side of the ledger, expenditures, the first 6 payrolls of the year have been processed in accordance with the different bargaining unit contracts. Benefits are also in line with the related wages and expectations, not just for the month, but year to date. The increase in benefits is attributable mostly due to the increase in our medical premiums, which we expected and budgeted for. You can see benefits at $4.3 million, which represent 10.72% of budget, very consistent with the prior year benefits of 10.62% on $4 million, $4,081,892. So again, very consistent, and we expect those to continue to stay in line within budget expectations. As we move down further in our expenditures, we look at professional services, specifically the 300 line item. As we've discussed before, the 300 line item relates to training and development across the district for our employees, as well as special education professional services. Prior year, the 300 object for professional services was $1,112,182. If you look at current year, we're sitting at $821,000. I'm sorry, $821,964. The material increase decrease from prior years that there was a legal assessment process last year in connection with the special education department for about $100,000. We have not had to incur that yet as far as that line item, but that's the material decrease for why we're looking at the $821,000 in the current year. Property services are, as identified by the 400 object, is our repairs and maintenance. That line item is comparable to prior year, and it includes our internal lease payments for the Chromebooks the board and the finance committee previously approved. So we did process that payment, made payable back to our capital reserve fund. So we essentially made that payment on our amortization schedule for Chromebooks. The next line item is our 500 object, which represents materially our payment to the VOTEC program for the first 2 months of the school year, as well as special education tuition payments to other LEAs and our transportation. The 500 object is about 10.74% of budget, represented by $1,902,083. And if we were to look at prior year, $2,017,848, over 12.92%. Again, within expectations and within our budget as we continue to process not just transportation, but also tuition payments to our other LEAs. As we move further down, we look at our object for 600. 600, as we've discussed, is materially made up of supplies and books. Supplies are comparable to prior year and expected, this time of the year. The increase in current year supplies, as identified by the $2.3 million in current year, or 37.83% of budget, is we purchased new handheld radios for our security department for Mr. McDonald and Mr. Lally to use throughout the district. They represented about $65,000 payable to one of our vendors, and that was backfilled by a federal grant. But that was use of one-time federal money to go out and buy these upgrades to our radios for this within the 600 supply line item. As we move down, the object 700, as we've discussed before, is still sitting at $352,796, a large increase over prior year. But like I said, as we've talked about, the upgrades to the PA systems over at Conshohocken Elementary and Ridge Park. There was some additional IT equipment purchased in September to the tune of about $53,000, but that was in connection with the IT department making sure everything's up to speed for the opening of the school year. The other object 800, is represented as our interest payments as we continue to make our interest payments in connection with our debt schedules. The material increase over prior year for the other objects line item is represented by the approved assessment appeals that have been processed over the last 2 months. The board would be familiar with that as we discussed those in exec session, and those dollars are captured. Other objects, like I said, is valued at $3,322,735, 49% of budget, and again represented materially in an increase due to the assessment appeals. The last line item is our 900 other object, use of funds. The school district provides funding for our athletic fund, which helps us pay for our officials at the various games, most notably right now the football games, as well as give them seed money as an athletic department to make their way over the first 6 months of the year. That is a budgeted figure. It represents 50% of the budgeted amount of $60,000. This is our first payment for the year. So overall, from a revenue compared to expenses standpoint, we are sitting at 53.29%, very comparable to prior year, 54.27%. We expect things to continue to run in line with prior year as well as budgetary numbers. From a topside standpoint, that's where we look for that schedule. And then some of our supplemental schedules, which I briefly just spoke about, are real estate taxes, transfer taxes, and et cetera. And obviously the board can look at these as well on board docs if there's any other questions. We'll see what happens with the transfer taxes and the interim taxes if they pick up. Those come in on a monthly basis, and we'll continue to monitor it as they come in. As we continue down, when we look at our expenditure analysis, again, as we talked about, this goes over all the different objects. But again, that For the 700 equipment and the 600 supplies, the increases are due to the PA overhead system and the new radios that were purchased. Ultimately, when we look at it again from a natural classification, overall total expenses for 23-24 are $20,812,284, while prior year total expenses were $19,752,052. Increases year over year represented again by the assessment of appeals, the Chromebook internal lease payments, and the new radios. That's why we are sitting at approximately a little bit more than $1 million over expenditures in prior years. Any questions with the 23-24 budget as it stands right now?
Those equipment purchases were the budget line item for equipment is higher because we were planning on making those this year. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
The equipment budget was higher going into the year, planning on making those PA upgrades. They weren't surprise expenses.
Yeah, no, those PA overhead systems were purchased in connection with the technology 5-year capital plan. The 2 buildings were chosen this year to get those done, and then we're looking forward to the next year and the next couple years to roll over to new PA systems for other buildings, as you know, as identified by Mr. Bogley. Similar to what we do with the 5-year facility capital project, we are putting together a 5-year information technology capital improvement plan. That will be something that will be discussed as we start to work on the 24-25 budget. But yeah, to answer your question, those expenditures were budgeted for the 2 PA systems.
Great.
The other item on the agenda is an informational item. As the committee is aware, every year PD issues guidance as well as rates for the Act 1 Index. The Act 1 Index provides guidance for school districts in which they must adhere to in order to cap how much they can raise school property taxes. There are certain exceptions in which a school district can exceed the Act 1 Index. This can be done either through certain exceptions such as special education, debt service, retirements. But then most recently, PDE came out 2 weeks ago with the rate for Colonial School District. And again, this is just informational, but I just want to inform the board that the rate was set at 5.3%. Going back as far as 2015, 2016, this is the highest rate that's ever been assigned to Colonial. This is not indicative of where we will go or anywhere where we will be. I just want to make sure that the board was aware of this this was what was issued to Colonial School District for the 24-25 school year. This is something we'll look at over the next couple months. If we choose to exceed it or if we choose to stay under it, that will be part of the budget development process for 24-25.
So that Act 1 Index, that's with exceptions?
No, that is not with exceptions.
And that's just for us or for everybody? I thought that Act 1 was like straight across the board, across the state. I didn't realize it was.
So Act 1 is assigned to, every school district receives a Act 1 Index factor at the beginning of every year. Yep, it's established by looking at market values within the district, low income levels. There's 7 factors that PD will look at. For school districts such as Norristown or Pottstown, they get an adjusted index based off of some of their demographic information. And theirs is, I believe Norristown was set at 7%. So Norristown, with their adjusted...
Because of their aid ratio.
Exactly, right.
I just didn't realize that it was different from district to district.
It
was just an Act 1 Index. I just said, okay, that's the Act 1.
So, yeah, Act 1 kind of lags behind. It's that SAL index, right?
Yes.
The weekly average wages. And if you notice when the economy, and there's another major index, when the economy was reemerging after in the early, 10 to 11, 12s, right after the big drop, the Act 1 index still stayed really low. And the board was like at 1.7, 1.5, 2.1, even though the economy in the 14, 15, 16 was starting to recover. And so even though while it's still sort of tentative right now, and maybe the economy might slow down, it's that delay from the indexes that shows that 5.3, which we're obviously not going to be recommending to go there. And then districts with the different aid ratio can have a higher Act 1 index, but I can't imagine anybody going to 7 or 8%.
So if they get a higher Act 1 index because they get more aid, why would they increase the taxes of the people that need the aid? Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't
Excellent question.
make logic to me. Like, those people that get the most, they need the most help. And if they can go up 7%, that's crazy.
$6 billion.
I'm sorry, I just, like, just
Very good question.
makes sense.
So again, this is purely informational. This is not anything we're recommending tonight. I just want to make sure that the committee was aware, and this is something that we will continue to work with over the next few months and have further discussions. And you can see here what the base index was going back to 2015-16, as well as the approved rate change by Colonial School District. So again, it's just some historical numbers, but I want to get it out to the committee as we'll continue to discuss this over the next month or two in connection with the budget prep work. This is also on board docs if anybody would like to pull it up. But any other questions as far as that? Yes.
What's the asterisk for?
In 2019-2020, this Colonial School District did exceed the Act 1 index. You can see the Act 1 index was 2.3, and it was due to special education expenditures as well as debt service, we were approved by PD to exceed the Act 1 index that year. But that was the only year. Yep. Yeah, that's all I have.
So I just have a question that's finance related, but not to this. But so when the governor said that all public schools would get free breakfast for the kids, how do they pay for that? Like, do we have to put the money up front and then ask for reimbursement, or how does that work?
No. So every time a student comes up to the counter and receives their free breakfast, they either have to put their student ID in or they finger scan. And what Lori McCoy and her food service department does is that they quantify that data and they submit it through the EPAR system of PDE, and then PDE will send that money based on the number of students we claim for free breakfast for that program.
So if a student is absent that day, then they
have to actively receive that meal.
Gotcha. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Thanks.
And so it hits our budget both in the expenses and then in the state income lines?
Well, the expenses on the food services, they make their food supply purchases.
Right.
They pay their wages, they pay their benefits. Their income line items, revenues that they're collecting, is based off of their claims reports that they're submitting to the state. Now, the state does have a lag because we quantify that information throughout the month, but then we submit it on a monthly basis. So, for example, the month of September just ended. We're working to solidify all those claim numbers. We'll then send that to PDE. PDE will review it, and then they will send us the money probably next 2 or 3 weeks. But there's a month lag on the claim process to payment. But from an expenditure standpoint, their expenses are paying our salaries and wages, benefits, and then actually buying the food in bulk from U.S. Foods or whoever other vendors are.
Now, does free and reduced lunch work the same way?
Yep, everything's based off a claim system,
and it's
information
based
that's
on
captured in our system.
So if the student's not there for
Correct.
A week or whatever, then okay. Thank you.
Right, we couldn't have 5,000 kids on our rolls and nobody shows up. Let's say the school was closed one day. We don't get credit for 5,000 meals that day because the school wasn't open.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on the agenda for Finance Committee? Okay, that concludes my presentation.
Great.
Just as a side note, too, I met with Lori today. She meets with Mark and I on a monthly basis to review the numbers, and breakfast is going great. We did receive word, and I know nobody wants to hear about drivers, but U.S. Foods has a lack of drivers, so they're going to be delivering less frequently. Lori orders ahead, so she's always about 4 to 6 weeks ahead, and there are other services we can use. We're also hosting Mrs. O'Reilly is organizing a job fair, not only for bus drivers, but also we need a handful of cafeteria employees. So we're about 18 to 20% light. So they're all doing a great job, but due to some recent retirements and growth, we could use a few more employees. So we've had an open posting up for a while, and they've been interviewing. So everybody's getting fed. Kids are getting through the lines in an efficient manner, but certainly it's just the reality of the workforce issues everybody's facing.
Can I ask one more question on that whole food thing? So if our students who go to the tech school in the morning, they don't get breakfast at PW because they go to the tech school. But the tech school doesn't qualify for the program, I don't believe.
Because they don't operate a cafeteria.
Right, but they still give the kids something.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a way, I don't know, like because they can't claim anything, so it's an expense on them. Is there a way to merge that at all, like the data of the kids that are there to get?
Yeah, I know it was a bigger issue for Norristown because they were having a lunch issue. So I think you're describing a similar issue between breakfast and lunch. So we met with Dr. King and we're trying to come up with an idea for like a grab and go type of opportunity. You know, I know our kids, before they go over, they have lunch before they go over for PM. Yeah.
It's not a matter of the kids not eating. It's just a matter of like, if the funding is technically there for the kid.
Right.
But the kid.
But they have to operate a program, and while they have a culinary program, they don't have a operating cafeteria.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I'm glad you brought that up because when we met with Lori, she has offered to the tech school, since we could use some additional assistance at our schools, since they have a very robust culinary program, she is reaching out to the tech school to see if any juniors or seniors want to do internships and learn, particularly at our middle school, because they could walk, so it wouldn't even be a transportation issue. It's right in the backyard. So Dr. King hopefully will reach out to us and we can have some kids, get our students, get some professional experience. And it's certainly selfishly, it helps us out too with, with a workforce shortage.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Are there any public comments on tonight's meeting? All right. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
We're going to go right into HR. Okay. Start the HR meeting for the month of October. Are there any public comments? Okay.
On? Oh, whoa, there we go. I think I'm on. Thank you. Okay, for information item this evening, I want to share with the public and the board that we will be hosting once again a fall job fair for support staff positions, full-time, part-time, and substitute opportunities. We'll be hosting this at the middle school in the cafeteria on Thursday, October 26th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Of course, staff from all these departments will be available, as well as from First Student. They will have a table there as well. We will be hopefully hiring staff in the areas of food services, custodial, and transportation. Questions about the job fair? No. Okay. New business this evening, we are looking at board policy number 328. This is a new title and language, deleted district policies and replaced with a PSBA policy guide as a recommendation. The language and draft applies to all employees. This policy is categorized as a legal liability. This particular policy speaks to the board's obligation to approve compensation plans, individual contracts, and salary schedules for administrative, professional, and classified employees. Along with the administrative compensation plan, it'll be determined through a good faith meet and discuss, which is referred to also as Act 93, procedure designated administrators upon written request of a majority of the district administrators. Our salary schedules approved by the board shall be in accordance with those specified in our applicable collective bargaining agreements. and resolutions. Salary schedules shall be used to set compensations for new and inexperienced employees and for experienced employees new to the district, and salary adjustments that results from earning advanced degrees while employed by the district or required by law. The implementation of the administrative and compensation plan, individual contracts, collective bargaining agreements, and board resolution regarding employee salaries shall be the sole responsibility of the superintendent, and our superintendent is authorized to credit past experience of a candidate when determining salary. This policy will be a first reading, appear on our October 19th public board meeting, and then open for any changes or recommendations, and then a second and final reading of the adoption of the policy to appear on November's public board meeting. Are there questions about the policy? Okay. Thank you.
Are there any comments from the board or any public comments? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Tell me.